The warning protocol DR. Stura Chen pressed her face against the transport window. Watching the massive structure of Kepler Interstellar University grow larger against the star-filled backdrop, the university was a marvel of engineering, its crystal. Spires and floating platforms connected by streams of light that pulsed with data transfers. After 3 years of applications, interviews, and waiting, she was finally here, the first human ever accepted into the galaxy's most prestigious educational institution. The transport docked with a gentle hum, and Sarah gathered her belongings. Her single bag contained everything she owned that mattered. Research notes, her grandmother's compass, and a small Earth flag. Simple items, but they represented her entire world's hopes, riding on her shoulders. The airlock hissed open, revealing a reception area filled with beings she had only seen in textbooks. Tall, graceful Etherians with their translucent skin glowing softly. Mechanical cogitans with their perfectly engineered bodies clicking in worry. Tentacled Aquarians floating in mobility pods filled with their home world's methane-rich atmosphere. And dozens of other species, each more fascinating than the last. "Dr. Chen?" a voice called out in perfect galactic standard. Sarah turned to see a humanoid figure approaching. The being had blue-tinted skin, 4 arms, and kind eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. "I am Chancellor Vexka, Administrator of Student Affairs. Welcome to Kepler University." "Thank you, Chancellor. I'm honored to be here." Sarah extended her hand in the human greeting she had practiced, but Chancellor Vexka stepped back slightly. "Ah, yes, about that." The Chancellor's expression grew uncomfortable. "We need to discuss some special arrangements for your stay here. Please, follow me." They walked through corridors that seemed to bend and flow around them, the walls alive with bioluminescent patterns that responded to their presence. Students of various species moved past them, and Sarah noticed something strange. Whenever the other students saw her, they would stop their conversations and stare. Some backed away, others whispered urgently to their companions.
"Chancellor,"
Sarah said, her scientific curiosity overriding her politeness. "Is there something I should know about the other students' reactions?" Chancellor Vexka's forearms moved in what Sarah guessed was the equivalent of a nervous gesture. "That's precisely what we need to discuss. Here, this is your assigned quarters." The room was comfortable but sterile, clearly designed for human physiology but lacking any personal touches. What caught Sarah's attention immediately was the second bed. "Am I sharing the room with another student?" she asked, in a manner of speaking. Chancellor Vexka activated a communication device. "Please, send an advisor Keth9." The door slid open, and another being entered. This one was clearly a warrior of some kind, tall, muscular, with scarred carapace and alert eyes that seemed to catalog every possible threat in the room. Most disturbing of all, Sarah could see the outline of weapons concealed beneath the being's official university robes. "Dr. Chen, meet advisor Keth9. They will be your cultural sensitivity advisor during your time here." "Cultural sensitivity advisor?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't told I would need one." Keth9 spoke for the first time, their voice a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in their chest. "It is a new requirement, implemented after careful consideration by the university board. I will accompany you to all classes, social events, and academic activities." "Like a babysitter," Sarah said flatly. "Like a guardian," Keth9 corrected. And Sarah noticed their hand unconsciously move toward their concealed weapon. Chancellor Vexka intervened quickly. "Dr. Chen, please understand that your presence here represents a significant step forward in interspecies relations. We simply want to ensure that your integration proceeds smoothly." "Integration into what?" "I'm here to study xenobiology and comparative evolution." What could possibly require armed supervision? The silence that followed was deafening. Chancellor Vexka and Keth9 exchanged glances that spoke volumes. "Your class schedule," Chancellor Vexka said finally, handing Sarah a data tablet. "You'll notice some modifications to your requested coursework." Sarah scrolled through the schedule, her frown deepening with each line. "This isn't what I applied for. Where's advanced strategic biology? Military applications of evolutionary theory? Survival adaptations in hostile environments? Those courses have been deemed Inappropriate for your species. Inappropriate. Sarah's voice rose slightly, and she noticed Kathleen tense immediately. These are fundamental aspects of evolutionary biology. How can they be inappropriate? Perhaps we should discuss the Terran incident, Kathleen said quietly. Sarah had never heard of any Terran incident, but the way both aliens reacted to the mention suggested it was significant. What Terran incident? That, said Chancellor Vexka, is precisely why we have protocols in place. The next morning brought Sarah's first classes, and with them, a growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the university's approach to education. Her comparative evolution course, taught by Professor Zimlak, a distinguished Etherian scholar, seemed to skip over entire sections of evolutionary theory. Today we study the peaceful development of intelligence in herbivorous species, Professor, Zimlak announced to the lecture hall filled with students from a dozen different worlds. The gentle path, as it has come to be known, represents the ideal evolutionary trajectory toward sapience. Sarah raised her hand. Professor, what about predator-prey, evolutionary pressures? Those relationships often drive some of the most rapid evolutionary adaptations. The entire lecture hall fell silent. Professor Zimlak's ethereal glow dimmed noticeably. That is not part of our current curriculum, Dr. Chen. But it's fundamental to understanding evolutionary mechanisms. Competition, resource scarcity, survival. Pressure? These are core drivers of adaptation and intelligence. A student in the back of the hall made a sound that might have been a whimper. Kathleen stood up from their observer's seat and took a step towards Sarah. Perhaps, Professor Zimlak said carefully, we could explore this topic in private consultation. After class, as students filed out while casting nervous glances at Sarah, she approached the professor. I don't understand. Why are basic evolutionary concepts being avoided? Professor Zimlak looked around nervously, then activated a privacy field around their conversation. Dr. Chen, has no one explained the protocols to you? What protocols? The human protocols, established after the Terran incident 3 years ago. The professor's glow flickered with what Sarah was learning to recognize as anxiety. Are not permitted to discuss certain topics without supervision? Topics related to strategic thinking? Strategic thinking? You mean problem solving? I mean the systematic application of competitive analysis to overcome opposition. What your species apparently considers normal cognitive function. Sarah stared at the professor. You're afraid of how humans think. Not afraid, Professor Zimlak corrected quickly, concerned about the effects of human cognitive patterns on other species. The Terran incident demonstrated that human strategic thinking can be ... contagious. That afternoon, Sarah's curiosity led her to the university's vast digital library. Surely she could find information about this mysterious Terran incident. But her searches hit walls at every turn. The university's AI, a sophisticated entity called Arya, seemed to redirect every inquiry away from topics related to human military history, strategic thinking, or anything that might explain why her species was treated with such caution. Arya, Sarah said to the empty library study room. I need access to historical records about human-alien educational exchanges. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen, Arya's pleasant voice responded, but that information is restricted under Protocol 7 Alpha. However, I can provide you with extensive resources on human cultural achievements, artistic endeavors, and culinary traditions. Protocol 7 Alpha, classification restricted. I suggest our comprehensive database on human music. It's considered quite safe and enjoyable by most species. Sarah spent the rest of the day trying different approaches, each one blocked by increasingly sophisticated redirections. By evening, she was frustrated and more curious than ever. As she returned to her quarters, she found Kathleen waiting for her. Productive day of research? The advisor asked, and Sarah detected a note of knowing in their voice. Not particularly. Arya seems to think I should focus on human art and cooking. Perhaps Arya has a point. Some knowledge is best shared gradually. Sarah stopped walking and faced Kathleen directly. What happened at the Terran incident? For a long moment, the warrior advisor studied her with those alert eyes. Then, unexpectedly, they made a decision that would change everything. Sit down, Dr. Chen. You deserve to know why your species terrifies the greatest minds in the galaxy. Keth-9 activated a portable privacy field and began to speak. 3 years ago at Proxima Educational Collective, a human student named Dr. Marcus Webb was enrolled in their Strategic Studies program. Unlike here, they had no protocols in place. Dr. Webb was given full access to their curriculum, including courses on historical conflicts, resource management, and what they called leadership studies. Sarah listened intently as Keth-9 continued. Within 6 months, Dr. Webb had revolutionized their understanding of strategic thinking. But more than that, he began teaching other students. Informal study groups at first, then organized seminars. He introduced concepts like game theory, probability analysis, scenario planning, and something called thinking 3 moves ahead. Those are just analytical tools, Sarah protested. To humans, yes. 2 species that evolved along cooperative paths, they were revelations. The Proxima Collective had never encountered systematic competitive analysis. Their society was built on consensus and harmony. Keth-9 paused, their scarred carapace reflecting the room's soft lighting. Dr. Webb didn't intend to cause disruption. He was simply sharing what humans consider basic problem-solving skills. But the effect was extraordinary. Students began applying these concepts to everything: resource allocation, social hierarchies, academic competition. That sounds like progress to me. Within a year, the Proxima Collective's entire social structure had been transformed. Traditional cooperative systems were replaced by competitive meritocracies. Students formed alliances, created information networks, and began what they called strategic planning for their futures. Sarah began to understand. They became more like humans. They became more successful, Keth-9 corrected. Grades improved dramatically. Research projects achieved breakthrough results. Students began landing positions throughout the galaxy that had previously been reserved for graduates of more prestigious institutions. So what was the problem? The problem was that it worked too well. Other species began to see the changes. In Proxima graduates and wanted the same advantages. Suddenly, every educational institution in the galaxy was under pressure to adopt human-style thinking. Keth-9 stood and moved to the window, looking out at the star-filled space beyond. The Galactic Education Council called an emergency session. They had to decide whether to embrace this new form of education or restrict it, and they chose restriction. They chose caution. The human protocols were established to prevent what they termed cognitive contamination. Humans would be welcome. In higher education, but with careful oversight to prevent the spread of competitive strategic thinking, Sarah felt a mix of pride and frustration. So my species is considered dangerous because we're good at solving problems? Your species is considered dangerous because you're good at solving problems that other species didn't know were problems. In the first place, that night, Sarah lay in her bed, staring at the artificial stars projected on her ceiling. Everything she had experienced since arriving at the university now made sense. The nervous glances, the restricted choruses, the armed advisor, the censored research, databases, it was all designed to contain something the galaxy feared: human ingenuity. But Sarah Chen was a scientist. And the greatest discovery of her career was beginning to take shape in her mind. If human thinking was truly as revolutionary as the aliens believed, then perhaps it was time to prove just how powerful unrestricted human creativity could be. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah began planning what would become known throughout the galaxy as the human liberation, though she preferred to think of it as the great education. After all, the best way to overcome fear of knowledge was to demonstrate its benefits. The forbidden knowledge Sarah woke before dawn, her mind buzzing with plans. 3 days of carefully observed classes had taught her valuable lessons about the university's security protocols, student behavior patterns, and most importantly, the gaps in their surveillance systems. If she was going to uncover the truth about the human protocols, she would need to be strategic about it. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was going to use the very thinking patterns. The aliens feared to defeat their restrictions. Her first breakthrough came during what was supposed to be a routine bathroom break. The university's monitoring systems designed by species that valued privacy and assumed cooperative behavior, had blind spots. Sarah discovered that the maintenance tunnels between building sections were largely unmonitored, apparently considered too mundane for surveillance. During her advanced biochemistry class, Sarah excused herself and slipped into one of these tunnels. Following the building's structural map she had memorized, she made her way to the administrative sector. Her target was the physical archive, where older records were stored in formats that predated the digital restrictions. The archive was vast, filled with crystalline data storage units from dozens of different species. Sarah's training in xenobiology proved invaluable as she navigated the alien filing systems. Most species organized information by emotional resonance or temporal significance, concepts that took her some time to understand, but eventually she found what she was looking for: file designation. PROXIMA 7734. Human Cognitive Study. Classified. The crystalline storage unit pulsed with a warm orange light as Sarah connected her portable reader. What she discovered made her understand why the galaxy's educational establishment was so terrified Dr. Marcus. Webb hadn't just introduced strategic thinking to the Proxima Collective. He had systematically demonstrated how human cognitive patterns could be applied to solve problems that had plagued the collective for generations. Resource allocation disputes that had dragged on for decades were resolved in weeks. Academic research that had stalled for years suddenly achieved breakthrough results. Students who had been struggling with traditional cooperative learning methods excelled when introduced to competitive analytical frameworks. But the most significant discovery was what happened when non-human students began applying human strategic thinking to their own species. CHALLENGESA, a Therian student named Luska, had used game theory to revolutionize their homeworld's meditation practices, increasing spiritual enlightenment efficiency by 300%. A Cogitan named Prime 47 had applied scenario planning to mechanical engineering, developing self-repairing systems that the Cogitan Empire had been trying to create for centuries. Most remarkably, an Aquarian named Deepsinger had used human pattern recognition techniques to decode previously incomprehensible signals from their species' ancient ancestors. The files contained hundreds of similar examples. Human thinking. Patterns weren't just compatible with other species, they were synergistic. They enhanced and amplified existing capabilities in ways that neither humans nor aliens had imagined possible. Sarah found herself staring at a particular report that made her heart race. It was a psychological evaluation of the affected students, conducted by the galaxy's leading experts in cognitive science. The conclusion was startling. Subjects demonstrate no negative psychological effects from exposure to human strategic patterns. Instead, all subjects report increased confidence, improved problem-solving satisfaction, and enhanced sense of personal agency. Recommendation: further study required to understand the full potential of interspecies cognitive collaboration. Recommendation had been rejected by the Galactic Education Council. Instead, they had implemented the human protocols. Fascinating reading. Sarah spun around to find Keth9 standing in the archive entrance. Her advisor didn't look angry, just resigned. "You knew I would find this," Sarah said. "I hoped you would. Human curiosity is as legendary as human strategic thinking." Keth9 entered the archive and sealed the door behind them. "The question is, what do you plan to do with this knowledge?" Sarah studied her advisor carefully. Something in their tone suggested this was a test of some kind. "You want me to find this?" "Why?" Keth9 moved to one of the archive terminals and began accessing files with administrator-level clearance. "'Cause 3 years ago, I was the security chief at Proxima Collective during the Terran incident." Sarah's eyes widened. "You were there?" "I was the one who recommended Dr. Webb for the Strategic Studies program. I was also the one who wrote the final report that led to the human protocols." Keth9's scarred carapace seemed to darken with what Sarah was learning to recognize as regret. "I have spent 3 years wondering if I made the right choice." New files appeared on the terminal, each one more revealing than the last. Sarah saw footage of the Transform Proxima Collective students engaged in passionate debates, research. Teams achieving impossible deadlines, individuals who had found their voices in ways their species had never experienced before. "It looks like paradise," Sarah whispered. It was Keth9 agreed, and it terrified the establishment. For the first time in galactic history, a single educational institution was producing graduates who consistently outperformed peers from more prestigious universities. The traditional hierarchy of learning was being challenged, so they shut it down to protect their own interests. They shut it down to protect stability. At least, that's what they told themselves. Keth9 activated another file. But there was something else, something that scared them even more than successful students. The new file contained a recording of Dr. Webb's final presentation to the Proxima Educational Council. Sarah watched as the human addressed an audience of alien educators, his voice calm and confident. "The transformation you've witnessed here isn't about humans teaching aliens to think like humans," Webb was saying. "It's about discovering that intelligence itself is more flexible and powerful than any of us realized. When different cognitive patterns interact, they don't just add together, they multiply." The recording showed the alien educators' reactions. Some were fascinated, others deeply disturbed. Sarah could see the exact moment when fear began to outweigh curiosity. Webb continued, "We've only scratched the surface of what's possible. Imagine if every species shared their unique cognitive approaches. Etherian intuitive processing combined with Cogitan logical analysis and human strategic thinking, Quarian pattern recognition, enhanced by Vorthan artistic visualization, and Klingok emotional intelligence." He was talking about a cognitive revolution, Sarah realized. He was talking about the end of species-based thinking limitations, Keth9 corrected. And that's when the council decided he was too dangerous to continue. Sarah spent the next hour absorbing the complete record of the Proxima collective transformation. By the time she finished, her understanding of the situation had completely changed. This wasn't about human superiority. It was about the untapped potential of cognitive diversity. "Keth9," she said finally, "what would happen if other students here learned about this officially? They would be disciplined for accessing classified information. Unofficially." Keth9's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was their species' equivalent of a smile. They would probably demand to know why they've been denied access to educational opportunities that could revolutionize their thinking. And if they demanded that access, university would have to choose between maintaining the protocols and maintaining their educational integrity. Sarah felt the familiar excitement of a scientist approaching a breakthrough. "You want me to challenge the system?" "I want you to do what humans do best," Keth9 replied. "I want you to solve a problem that everyone else considers unsolvable." That evening, Sarah began implementing her plan, using her knowledge of the university's social patterns. She identified the most curious and academically ambitious students from various species. Her first target was Zaraka, an Etherian physics student, who had been struggling with quantum mechanics calculations. Sarah approached the student after their shared mathematics of the universe class. "I noticed you're having trouble with the multidimensional probability calculations." The Etherian's glow dimmed with embarrassment. "My species doesn't think in linear progressions like the mathematics requires. We understand reality as flowing patterns, not discrete calculations. What if I told you there was a way to combine your pattern recognition with the mathematical framework, a way that might actually give you an advantage over students who only think linearly?" Zaraka's glow brightened with interest. "That would be impossible. The mathematics is absolute. Mathematics is absolute, but the approaches to understanding it are infinite." Sarah glanced around to make sure they weren't being observed. "Meet me in study room 7 tonight. I'll show you something that might change how you think about problem solving." Similar conversations took place throughout the day. Sarah was careful to choose students who were struggling with their coursework, making her offer seem like simple tutoring rather than anything more revolutionary. By evening, she had assembled a group of 8 students from 6 different species. Study Room 7 was perfect for their purposes, small enough to seem informal, but with privacy barriers that would prevent casual observation. Sarah had spent the afternoon preparing materials that would demonstrate human strategic thinking without explicitly mentioning the forbidden topics. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began as the diverse group settled into the adaptive seating. "I know you're all struggling with different aspects of your studies. What I want to show you tonight is that those struggles might not be personal failures. They might be systematic limitations in how we're being taught to think." She activated the room's holographic display and began with a simple problem: optimizing the arrangement of laboratory equipment for maximum research efficiency. It was a practical challenge that every student could relate to. But Sarah presented it using techniques that the university's curriculum carefully avoided. Instead of just accepting the traditional layout, she explained, "Let's think about this systematically. What are the key variables? What are the constraints? What are the desired outcomes? And how do these factors interact with each other?" As Sarah guided the students through the problem-solving process, she watched their reactions carefully. The Etherean student, Zerika, began to see how pattern recognition could be applied systematically. Gorth Prime, a cogitant student, discovered how logical analysis could be enhanced by considering multiple scenarios simultaneously. Deep Current, an Aquarian, realized how their species' natural tendency toward holistic thinking could be structured to produce specific results within 2 hours. The diverse group had not only solved the laboratory optimization problem, but had generated 3 different innovative solutions that none of them could have developed alone. "This is remarkable," whispered Velnine, a Vorthan student whose species specialized in artistic expression. "I've never thought about creativity as a systematic process before." "Because you've never been taught to," Sarah replied. "What you've just experienced is what happens when different cognitive approaches work together instead of separately." "But why haven't we learned these techniques before?" asked Zerika. "This seems like fundamental knowledge for any advanced education." Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been building toward. Because these techniques are considered too dangerous for non-human students to learn. The room erupted in confusion and questions. Sarah spent the next hour explaining the human protocols, the Proxima collective transformation, and the systematic censorship of strategic thinking techniques. She showed them selected portions of the classified files, watching as understanding. And anger grew in equal measure. "You're telling us," Gorth Prim said, their mechanical voice vibrating with indignation, "that we've been deliberately denied access to educational tools that could enhance our cognitive abilities? I'm telling you that the galaxy's educational establishment has decided that some knowledge is too powerful to share freely." Deep Current's tentacles rippled with what Sarah recognized as the Aquarian expression of deep thought. "If these techniques are so effective, why aren't human students dominating every field of study?" It was a perceptive question, and Sarah had been hoping someone would ask it. Because humans have been isolated too. "We've been prevented from learning from your cognitive approaches just as you've been prevented from learning from ours." Protocols don't just restrict what you can learn. They restrict what we can learn together. The implications hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the moment when curiosity overcame caution in each student's expression. "Propose we do about it?" asked Vel-9. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the university, she felt like she was about to engage in the kind of strategic thinking that made her species legendary. "I propose we prove that the protocols are wrong." "One propose. We demonstrate that cognitive diversity makes everyone stronger, not weaker. And I propose we do it in a way that the university administration can't ignore or suppress." "How?" asked Zerika. "By solving a problem that none of us could solve alone, but all of us can solve together. By showing the galaxy what happens when different species really learn from each other." The underground study group was born that night, and with it, it's the beginning of a revolution that would transform not just Kepler University, but the entire galaxy's approach to education and interspecies cooperation. Sarah Chen, the first human, admitted to the galaxy's most prestigious university, was about to become the catalyst for the greatest advancement in galactic civilization since the invention of faster-than-light travel, and she was going to do it by teaching everyone around her to think. The revolution of minds, the underground study group, grew rapidly over the following weeks. What started as 8 students meeting in secret had evolved into a network of over 50 individuals from 12 different species, all hungry for the cognitive tools they had been denied. Sarah found herself at the center of something far more significant than she had originally planned. The group's activities had to be carefully coordinated to avoid detection. They developed a system of seemingly innocent academic study sessions that were actually sophisticated training in strategic thinking, problem-solving, and cognitive integration. Each species brought their unique mental capabilities to the collective, creating combinations of thinking that had never existed before in galactic history. The breakthrough came when they decided to tackle the university's most persistent, unsolved problem, the Kepler energy crisis. For decades, the university had struggled with power distribution across its massive structure. The institution's energy needs were enormous, requiring power sources that could adapt to the diverse environmental requirements of dozens of species. Traditional solutions had failed because they approached the problem from single-species perspectives, creating systems that worked well for some inhabitants, but poorly for others. Sarah proposed that their diverse group attack the problem using their combined cognitive abilities. This is our chance to prove that cognitive diversity isn't just helpful. It's essential for solving complex challenges. The project became their secret obsession. Etherian pattern recognition identified energy flow bottlenecks that had gone unnoticed for years. Cogitant logical analysis optimized the mathematical models that govern power distribution. Aquarian holistic thinking revealed interconnections between seemingly unrelated systems. Vorthon artistic visualization created new ways to conceptualize energy flow that made complex calculations intuitive, and Sarah's human strategic thinking provided the framework that allowed all these different approaches to work together systematically. 3 weeks, they had developed a solution that was elegant, efficient, and revolutionary. Their design would not only solve the university's current energy problems, but would actually improve performance by 340% while reducing costs by half. "It's impossible," whispered Kethnine when Sarah showed them the preliminary results. "No single the research team has ever achieved improvements of this magnitude. That's because no single research team has ever had access to this level of cognitive diversity," Sarah replied. "We're not just solving problems, we're solving them in ways that no one species could imagine alone." But their success created a new problem. Discovery of this magnitude couldn't remain secret. The energy crisis was one of the university's highest priorities, and a solution would inevitably attract attention from the highest levels of administration. "We need to go public," Sarah announced at their next meeting. The group had grown so large that they now met in the university's abandoned observatory complex, a relic from the institution's early days that had been deemed too dangerous for regular use. "If we reveal ourselves, they'll shut us down immediately," protested Zarka. "The protocols exist specifically to prevent this kind of collaboration." "They exist to prevent uncontrolled collaboration," Sarah corrected. "We're not uncontrolled anymore. Organized, we're successful, and we're about to solve a problem that the university's best minds have failed to address for decades." Gorth Prime's mechanical systems whirred as they processed the strategic implications. "You're proposing we use our success to demand legitimacy. I'm proposing we use our success to prove that the protocols are counterproductive. The administration has 2 choices: acknowledge that we've achieved something remarkable, or suppress a solution to one of their biggest problems, to maintain an arbitrary restriction." Deep Current's tentacles rippled with what Sarah had learned was deep consideration. "Either way, we force them to confront the contradiction in their policies." The group spent hours debating the risks and benefits of revelation, some argued. For a gradual approach, slowly introducing their discoveries through official channels. Others wanted to continue operating in secret, building their capabilities until they were too powerful to suppress. But Sarah knew that half measures wouldn't work. The university administration wasn't evil or malicious. They were simply afraid of change. Only way to overcome that fear was to demonstrate that change could be overwhelmingly beneficial. "We present our solution publicly," she decided. "Full disclosure of our methods, our group composition, and our results. Make it impossible for them to ignore or suppress what we've accomplished." The presentation was scheduled for the university's monthly Academic Innovation Forum, an event where faculty and students could share their research with the entire community. Sarah's group had submitted their proposal under the deliberately mundane title Interdisciplinary Approaches to Energy Distribution Optimization. What the administration didn't know was that they had just approved a demonstration that would challenge the fundamental assumptions underlying their educational philosophy. The day of the presentation, the main auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through the student body that something significant was about to happen, though few understood exactly what. Faculty members filled the front rows, while students from dozens of species packed the remaining seats in standing areas. Chancellor Vexka introduced the presentation with the routine enthusiasm of someone who expected another boring technical discussion. Today, we welcome a collaborative research team led by Dr. Sarah Chen, presenting their work on energy distribution optimization. Sarah stepped to the podium, acutely aware that every eye in the auditorium was focused on her. Behind her, 53 students from 12 different species stood together, their diverse forms creating visual proof of unprecedented cooperation. 3 months ago, Sarah began, I arrived at this university as the first human admitted to your prestigious institution. I was assigned restrictions and supervision because of concerns about the effects of human strategic thinking on other species. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was already more controversial than anyone had expected. Today, I want to show you what happens when those restrictions are removed. When different species are allowed to learn from each other without fear or limitations. Sarah activated the presentation system, and the auditorium's holographic projectors came to life with a detailed display of the energy distribution problem that had plagued the university for decades. For 30 years, this institution has struggled with power distribution challenges. Multiple research teams, composed of the galaxy's finest minds, have attempted solutions. All have failed. The display showed the university's current energy system, with its inefficiencies and bottlenecks clearly visible in flowing red indicators. 7 weeks ago, a group of undergraduate students decided to tackle this problem, using approaches that are currently forbidden under the human protocols. We combined human strategic thinking with Etherian pattern recognition, Cogitan logical analysis, Aquarian holistic processing, Vorthan creative visualization, and cognitive capabilities from 8 other species. The display shifted to show their solution. The difference was immediately apparent, where the current system showed chaotic energy flows and multiple failure points. Their design showed elegant, efficient distribution patterns that seemed to flow like living things. Our solution improves energy efficiency by 340%, reduces operational costs by 52%, and creates redundancy systems that will prevent the power failures that have disrupted university operations 12 times in the past 3 years. The auditorium was completely silent. Even Chancellor Vexka was staring at the display with obvious amazement. But that's not the most important part of our achievement, Sarah continued. The most important part is how we achieved it, not by having one species solve the problem for others, but by creating a system where each species' cognitive capabilities enhanced and amplified each other. Sarah gestured to her diverse team. Zarika, please explain how Etherian pattern recognition contributed to our solution. The Etherian students stepped forward, their natural glow brightening with confidence. My species sees energy as flowing patterns rather than discrete mathematical equations. When we applied this perspective to the power distribution problem, we identified rhythm irregularities that mathematical analysis had missed completely. Gorthprim Sarah continued, tell them about the logical frameworks. The Cogitan's mechanical voice filled the auditorium with precise confidence. Human strategic thinking provided systematic approaches to scenario analysis that allowed us to test thousands of potential solutions efficiently. Combined with our computational capabilities, we could model complex interactions that would have taken traditional research teams years to evaluate. One by one, students from different species explained their contributions. Deep Current described how Aquarian holistic thinking revealed connections between energy distribution and environmental systems that hadn't been considered before. Valnine demonstrated how Vorthan artistic visualization had led to intuitive interface. Designs that made complex energy management accessible to operators from any species. As the presentation continued, the audience's amazement grew visibly. Faculty members were taking rapid notes, students were recording everything. And even the typically composed Chancellor Vexka was leaning forward with obvious fascination. "What you're witnessing," Sarah said, as the individual presentations concluded, "is not just a solution to an engineering problem. You're witnessing the birth of a new form of intelligence, collective cognitive diversity." She paused, letting the implications sink in. The human protocols were created to prevent contamination between species' thinking patterns. But what we've discovered is that such contamination isn't dangerous, it's revolutionary. When different cognitive approaches interact freely, they don't just add together. They create entirely new capabilities that no single species could develop alone. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Students began shouting questions. Faculty members demanded explanations. And several administrators activated emergency communication devices. Chancellor Vexka stood up, therefore arms raised for silence. "Dr. Chen, this presentation is highly irregular. You violated multiple protocols, and Chancellor," interrupted Professor Zimlak. The Etherean who had taught Sarah's first restricted class, "They've solved the energy crisis." The simple statement cut through all the protests and administrative concerns. For 30 years, the university's greatest minds had failed to address the power distribution problem. A group of undergraduate students had not only solved it, but had created a solution so elegant and efficient that it bordered on the miraculous. Furthermore, Professor Zimlak continued, standing to address the entire auditorium, "They've demonstrated capabilities that our current educational model considers impossible. We need to discuss the implications of these results." Was the most intense academic debate in the university's history. Faculty members argued passionately about educational philosophy, student rights, and the responsibility of educational institutions to provide unrestricted access to knowledge. Students organized impromptu discussion groups, demanding answers about why they had been denied access to cognitive tools that could enhance their abilities. The crisis reached its peak when the Galactic Education Council announced an emergency investigation into the university's handling of the human protocols. Sarah found herself at the center of a controversy that had spread far beyond the campus. With educational institutions throughout the galaxy demanding clarification of policies that suddenly seemed arbitrary and counterproductive, the resolution came 3 weeks later, in a meeting that would be remembered as a turning point in galactic educational history. Chancellor Vexka had assembled the university's full faculty council, student representatives, and observers from the Galactic Education Council. Sarah sat at the center of the room, flanked by her diverse team of collaborators, and facing an audience that would determine the future of interspecies education. "Dr. Chen," Chancellor Vexka began formally, "your actions have created significant disruption to established educational protocols. However, the results of your collaborative project cannot be ignored." The Chancellor activated a holographic display showing energy consumption data from the past 2 weeks. Since implementing Sarah's team's solution on a trial basis, the university's energy efficiency had improved exactly as predicted. More importantly, the system was performing flawlessly across all environmental zones, meeting the diverse needs of every species on campus. "The Galactic Education Council has reviewed your methods and results," the Chancellor continued. "They have reached several conclusions." Sarah felt her heart racing. Everything they had worked for was about to be decided by individuals who had spent years maintaining the very restrictions they had challenged. First, the cognitive integration techniques demonstrated by your team represent a genuine advancement. In problem-solving methodology, the Council acknowledges that restricting access to these techniques may have inadvertently limited educational outcomes. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembled faculty and students. Second, the success of your diverse collaboration suggests that current species segregated educational models may be suboptimal for developing the full potential of galactic citizens. Sarah exchanged glances with her team members, seeing hope beginning to replace anxiety in their expressions Third, the Council recognizes that the human protocols, while well-intentioned, may have created artificial barriers to educational achievement that serve no constructive purpose. Chancellor Vexka paused. Sarah realized that the next words would determine not just her future, but the future of education throughout the galaxy. Therefore, effective immediately, Kepler Interstellar University will implement new educational protocols. The human restrictions are hereby terminated. In their place, we will establish the Cognitive Diversity Initiative, designed to promote systematic collaboration between species with different thinking patterns. The auditorium exploded into cheers, arguments, and excited conversations in dozens of languages. Sarah felt a wave of relief and triumph that threatened to overwhelm her scientific composure. But Chancellor Vexka wasn't finished.
Dr. Chen,
The university's board of directors has voted unanimously to offer you a position as the first professor of interspecies strategic studies. Your mandate will be to develop curriculum and research programs that harness the cognitive diversity you've demonstrated. Sarah stood slowly, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching her response. Chancellor, I accept the position. But I have one condition. Yes. The program must be truly collaborative. No single species should be considered the teacher while others are students. We're all learning from each other. Agreed. 6 months later, Professor Sarah Chen stood in the largest lecture hall on campus, addressing an audience that would have been impossible under the old protocols. 300 students from 17 different species filled every seat, their diverse forms creating a living representation of the galaxy's intellectual potential. Today we begin our exploration of collective intelligence, Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced translation systems. Not human intelligence, or Etherian intelligence, or cogitant intelligence, but something entirely new, the intelligence that emerges when different forms of thinking work together. She activated the holographic display showing a complex problem that had been submitted by the Galactic Research Council. It was the kind of challenge that would normally require decades of work by specialized teams. Your assignment is to solve this problem using integrated cognitive approaches. You'll work in mixed-species teams, combining your natural thinking patterns with techniques you'll learn from each other. A student raised a tentacled appendage. Professor Chen, what if we discover cognitive combinations that no one has ever tried before? Sarah smiled, remembering her first day at the university when such questions would have been forbidden. Then we'll learn together what new forms of intelligence are possible. After all, the greatest discoveries come from exploring unknown territories. As her students began forming their diverse teams, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. The human protocols had been replaced throughout the galaxy with cognitive diversity standards that encouraged rather than restricted interspecies intellectual collaboration. Universities everywhere were restructuring their programs to harness the revolutionary potential of combined thinking patterns. But most importantly, the galaxy had learned that the greatest threats to progress weren't external enemies or resource limitations. They were the artificial barriers that prevented different forms of intelligence from working together. Kathleen, now serving as the university's Director of Cognitive Security, a position focused on protecting intellectual freedom rather than restricting it, appeared at Sarah's elbow. Any regrets about challenging the system, they asked? Sarah watched her students begin their collaborative work, seeing Etherian pattern recognition merge with cogitant analysis, human strategic thinking enhance Aquarian holistic processing, and Vorthan creativity inspire problem-solving approaches that none of them could have imagined alone. Only one, she replied. I regret that it took us so long to realize that our diversity was our greatest strength. Outside the lecture hall, the university hummed with the energy of unrestricted learning. Laboratories, mixed-species research teams were making discoveries at unprecedented rates. In dormitories, study groups combined cognitive approaches that were creating new forms of artistic expression, scientific analysis, and philosophical understanding. The galaxy had learned to think together, and the possibilities were limitless. Sarah Chen had come to Kepler University as the first human student admitted under restrictive protocols designed to contain her species. Supposedly dangerous thinking patterns She was leaving as Professor Chen, architect of an educational revolution. That had transformed not just how the galaxy learned, but how it understood the very nature of intelligence itself. And in the end, she had accomplished it by doing exactly what humans did best, solving problems that everyone else considered impossible by refusing to accept that they couldn't be solved. The greatest lesson of the human problem hadn't been about human superiority or alien limitations. It had been about the extraordinary potential that emerged when different forms of intelligence stopped fearing each other and started learning together. The galaxy would never be the same. That, Sarah thought as she watched her students create cognitive combinations that had never existed before in the universe's history, was exactly the point.